My name is Claire. I'm 33 years old, and for the last 3 years, I've been the reason my parents kept their home, kept their heat on, and had food on the table. Every month, I wired the mortgage payment. I covered the electric bill, the water bill, the car insurance. I bought their groceries when the pantry got low. I paid for the repairs when the heater failed last winter. I even slipped an extra few $100s to my mom now and then so she could get herself something nice. I never asked for anything back. Not thanks, not recognition, not even a phone call. I just did it, quietly, faithfully, because I thought that's what love looked like. Then came Thanksgiving. I hosted it, in my own home, my place, my dishes, my wine. I planned the menu around their favorite foods. I even got the exact craft beer my younger brother likes, though he's never lifted a finger to help them financially. I cooked for 12 hours straight, cleaned for 2 days before that, spent nearly $400 on groceries, and when dinner was served, do you know what happened? My dad told me to get out. He stood up, slammed his hand on the table, and said, "If you're going to talk to us like that, you can leave." But I didn't leave. I asked them to. One by one, I watched them walk out of my apartment, the apartment I pay for, the apartment they had just spent the last hour criticizing. That moment should have broken me. It didn't, because that night I finally did something I should have done years ago. I disowned them back, and just when I thought the worst was over, something else happened. Something my mother said without thinking, without planning, changed the way I understood everything. It wasn't just emotional neglect. It wasn't just favoritism. There was something else. Before I tell you what it was and how I finally set myself free, I want to know, have you ever been the one holding a family together that never made room for you? Then keep listening. Keep. This story is for you. I like quiet homes, not the kind that feel empty, but the kind where you can hear your own thoughts, where the floor doesn't creak unless you want it to, where the kitchen smells like coffee and lemon oil, and where nothing is out of place unless you put it there. Some people call it sterile. That's fine. I call it peace. Every item in my apartment has a reason. The dishes match. The knives are always sharp. The towels are folded the same way every time. Not because I'm obsessive, but because there's comfort in knowing something will be exactly where you left it. When you grow up around chaos, routine becomes survival. I started building this space long before I could afford it. Pinterest boards, sketches in old notebooks. I used to walk by other people's homes looking through lit windows and wondering what it might feel like to be inside a place that felt like it wanted you there. This apartment was my answer. Every wall painted in calm, intentional colors. Every window cleaned so light can move through the space without apology. I designed it like I design everything with function and boundaries in mind. I don't like surprises. I don't like raised voices. I don't like when people move through your life like they own it, then act offended when you ask them to wipe their feet. Growing up, our house was never still. It was loud. Not joyful loud, just crowded. Emotionally, physically, energetically. There was always a TV on a door, slamming a sibling, yelling a parent, sighing heavily. And there was me in the corner, headphones on, notebook open, trying not to be in the way. It's not that anyone said don't be here. It's just that they never really noticed when I was. You learn to take up less space when you're not sure your presence is welcome. I was always the responsible one. The quiet one. The doesn't need much one. That label sticks. Even when you're the one driving through a snowstorm to take your mother to her doctor's appointment. Even when you're the one wiring money to pay the mortgage on the house you haven't lived in for over a decade. Even when your younger brother forgets your birthday for the 4th year in a row and your mom says he's just busy, you know how he is? Yes, I know exactly how he is. He's charming, effortless, the kind of person people like before he opens his mouth. He gets away with things. He always has. Late on bills. That's just Jason not great with money. Skips family gatherings. Oh, Jason travels a lot for work. Poor thing. Forgets to call on Mother's Day. He probably sent a text. I, on the other hand, once didn't answer a group chat in time and got a voicemail from my mom asking if I was okay because I seemed cold lately. It's not that they hate me, it's just that they don't know me. They never tried. I've been the background character in my own family since I was old enough to notice, so I built a life where I didn't have to be noticed to feel valid. A career that rewards precision. A lifestyle that doesn't need approval. A schedule that answers only to me. But here's the thing about building walls: eventually, someone asks why they're there. And if that someone is your own mother looking around your apartment like it's a showroom instead of a sanctuary saying, "Don't you think this place could use a little color?" you start to remember exactly why those walls exist. Because color in their world meant chaos, meant yelling, meant someone throwing a shoe across the living room during an argument, meant birthdays where no one showed up on time and you had to cut your own cake, meant Father's Days spent hearing how hard it is to raise kids who don't appreciate you while you were the one who fixed dinner. So, no, I don't want color. I want calm. I want stillness. I want to sit in my chair at the end of the day and hear nothing but the low hum of the heater and the sound of my own breathing. And I earned it. Every inch of this place, every silence, every soft light, every bill paid on time. No one helped me. No one offered. And I didn't ask, because asking in my family always came with a price. Gratitude, submission, performance. If you wanted support, you had to play the role. I stopped auditioning years ago. Now I just perform for myself. There's a particular kind of silence you remember from childhood, not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes after you've said something important and no one responds, the kind that makes you question if you said anything at all. That's the kind of silence I grew up with. My earliest memories aren't of bedtime stories or laughter around the dinner table. They're of my father watching television, barely acknowledging my presence, and my mother standing at the sink humming softly while I stood nearby clutching a certificate from school she never asked to see. I was always the one with the good grades. Honor roll, spelling bees, science fairs. Every report card brought home was a list of A's, every parent-teacher conference a stream of praise. She's quiet, but very bright, they always said. Independent, focused. But at home there was no celebration. No fridge covered in my awards. No photos from my debates or presentations. Meanwhile, Jason brought home a participation ribbon from a soccer tournament, and the living room was filled with balloons and cupcakes. He tries so hard, my mom would say, her voice soaked in affection. I tried too. I just didn't make noise about it. Maybe that was my mistake. Being easy to overlook. Being low maintenance in a house that only noticed messes. My father was a man of few words, unless those words were disappointment. He had a tone he reserved just for me. Dry, disinterested, always a little annoyed. "You're too sensitive. Why are you so uptight? You think you're better than everyone." I never knew how to answer because I wasn't any of those things. I was just trying to be seen, trying to be valued. My mother, on the other hand, had a different strategy dismissal. She didn't argue with me. She simply redirected, minimized, or changed the subject. I'd come home thrilled about an academic scholarship and she'd say, "That's nice, but did you hear Jason made varsity?" Every time I did something impressive, Jason had just done something visible, and visible always won. I started keeping things to myself, awards, achievements, even struggles. What was the point of sharing if no one cared to hear? The year I won a statewide essay competition, I told no one. The certificate sat in a drawer. I didn't even get a well done. I stopped hoping for it. Jason didn't even have to try. He forgot homework, flunked a math test, and still got sympathy. "School's not really his thing," Dad would say with a laugh. "He's got people skills." That was the difference. Jason was fun, playful, charming in a messy, boyish way. People liked him instantly. Teachers, neighbors, friends of the family. He was always the golden one, and I was the one who could be trusted to set the table, clean the dishes, and disappear when the adults wanted to talk. By high school, the pattern was carved in stone. Jason got a used car when he turned 16. I got a bus pass. Jason brought home girlfriends, and they were welcomed with open arms. I brought home a boy once, and my mother asked me the next day if I thought he was a little too ambitious for someone like me. I don't know what that meant. I didn't ask. You learn not to ask. You learn to accept the scraps of kindness handed out when they align with your role. I became self-sufficient out of necessity. My room was my haven. I learned to cook for myself early. Learned to do my own laundry, budget my allowance, take myself to the library. I was a child who acted like a guest in her own home. Respectful, quiet, distant. Some people say the eldest daughter is like a third parent. I wasn't even that. I was more like the hired help. Useful, but replaceable. Forgotten until needed. The more I did, the less I was seen. The better I behaved, the more invisible I became. In college, I finally got out. I worked hard, took out loans, studied late into the night. I shared dorm rooms with strangers and found comfort in solitude. I graduated early. No one came to the ceremony. Jason had a last-minute trip. My parents said flights were too expensive. I smiled through the photos, posted one on social media with a vague caption about being proud. No one in the family liked the post, but Jason's post about his new dog got 50 comments. I remember sitting alone in my tiny apartment that first year after graduation, eating takeout and staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I just wasn't lovable in the way they needed. Maybe I had failed some unspoken test of family connection. I now know that wasn't true. But when you're raised in a home where love feels conditional on charm, on ease, on fitting into a mold, you start to believe that your very essence is hard to love. That you must do more, give more, be more. So I gave. I gave until I had nothing left to prove, and still it wasn't enough. It never would be, not for them. It started with a phone call on a gray Tuesday afternoon. I remember the weather because I had just come in from a site inspection soaked to the knees from Portland's relentless winter drizzle. My phone buzzed as I kicked off my boots. It was my mother. She rarely called unless something was wrong. I answered with the usual polite caution, and her voice was tight, carefully measured, like she'd rehearsed the words. My father had injured his back at work. Something with lifting, she said. He'd been let go from the warehouse. No severance, no medical coverage beyond what little they had. He'd applied for disability, but it could take months, maybe longer. She didn't cry, not yet. That came later. The part about the mortgage being 3 months behind. The threat of foreclosure. The insurance premiums they couldn't keep up with. I listened in silence, my hand gripping the counter, already calculating numbers in my head. I had just been promoted. My salary had doubled. My apartment was paid for. I had a savings cushion I hadn't touched in months. I could help. Of course I could help. What else was I going to do? Let them lose the house I grew up in. Let them go cold in winter. I told her I'd call her back. Then I opened my laptop and started making a list. Mortgage $1,600 a month. Utilities and basic bills around $800. Total monthly support $2. $400. It wasn't nothing, but it was doable. I shifted some investments, automated payments, set reminders. Within a week, I had rerouted part of my income straight to their accounts. I called the electric company, added myself as a guarantor. Called their insurance provider, updated billing information. They never asked me to. But they didn't say no either. My mother sounded relieved, grateful even the first time. Just until things stabilize, she said. Once your father recovers, we'll figure it out. I believed her, or at least I wanted to. I packed up and moved out of the city. Rented a smaller place in the suburbs 20 minutes from their home. Closer, but still not quite close enough to be tangled in the daily noise. I made sure they never missed a payment. I brought groceries when I visited, refilled prescriptions, replaced the broken washing machine without being asked. For 3 years, 36 months, $2, $400 every month, $400 in total. And not once did my father say thank you. Not once did my mother acknowledge the scope of what I was doing. If I ever mentioned finances, she'd grow quiet, then deflect. We don't like talking about money, dear, but they had no issue spending it. They kept the house. They turned the heat on full blast in winter. My father replaced his old car. My mother redecorated the guest room. When I offered to teach them about budgeting, my father waved it off. We managed before you were born, we'll manage now. But they weren't managing. I was managing. I was the quiet net catching all the pieces of their unraveling life. Meanwhile, Jason had moved to Florida, got married, sent Christmas cards with staged smiles and beach photos. He didn't contribute financially, didn't offer. And yet every time I visited, he was the center of conversation. Jason says the weather's beautiful, my mother would say. Jason's got such a good heart, my father added. When I asked if he might help with the bills, they looked surprised. He's just starting out, they said. He's got a new family to take care of. So did I. I wanted to scream. I was their family too. But I didn't scream. I swallowed the bitterness. I told myself this was what loyalty looked like. This was what a good daughter did. She filled the gaps. She picked up the slack. She stayed quiet while everyone else told themselves comforting lies. Until one Thanksgiving, everything changed. In the beginning, I kept track of every dollar. Not because I needed credit, but because I needed control. A spreadsheet hidden in a folder on my laptop labeled with an unassuming name. Just numbers, dates, confirmation codes. After the first year, I stopped updating it. Not because the expenses stopped, but because the expectation had become routine. Quiet. Unquestioned. Like brushing your teeth or locking the door before bed. I never missed a payment. Never let a bill lapse. I even paid early sometimes just to avoid the late-night anxiety of a reminder notice. They never asked me how I was doing. Not financially, not emotionally, not once. They assumed I guessed that if I could pay their mortgage, I must be fine. Comfortable. Maybe even lucky. The truth was, I was getting by. I had given up my original apartment downtown, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river, to move into something smaller, more practical, more hidden. I canceled a trip I'd been planning to Europe, postponed buying a car, cut back on little luxuries, switched to generic brands, skipped dinners with friends. And yet, every holiday, every phone call, every small interaction with my parents reminded me that none of it counted. Not really. The conversations were still dominated by Jason, how well he was doing, how busy he was, how funny his last email had been. His emails were 3 sentences long. Mine were monthly reports attached to transactions. But he was the one with the golden touch. He remembered anniversaries, sent flowers, called on speakerphone during dinner. The performative son, the easy one, the lovable one. And me, I was still the background character. The quiet benefactor, the reliable afterthought. One time, I asked my mother gently if she thought Jason might be able to contribute even a small amount. Maybe cover the internet or the gas bill. Her voice stiffened. He's got his own life now. You know how stressful things are for him. I didn't argue. I never argued. That was my role. The peacemaker, the invisible glue. I told myself it didn't matter that I didn't need their validation. That doing the right thing was enough. But deep down, I wanted something. Not applause, not even praise. Just a moment. One moment where someone looked at me, not through me, and said, "We see you. We know what you've done." And it mattered. That moment never came. Instead, what came was Thanksgiving. My turn to host, my invitation, my apartment. And for the first time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. Maybe they'd notice. Maybe they'd care. Maybe they'd say thank you. They didn't. I started preparing days in advance. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted everything to be perfect. Not fancy, just thoughtful, intentional. I planned the menu with care, included all their favorites. My father's bourbon-glazed ham, my mother's sweet potato casserole, though I made it from scratch instead of using canned yams. Jason's favorite IPA tracked down from a specialty store across town. I cleaned the apartment until it sparkled, set the table with the good dishes, used cloth napkins, polished the wine glasses my grandmother left me, the same ones my mother didn't want. I told myself this would be the year it all paid off, that they'd walk in and just for once see me not what I lacked, not what I wasn't, but the effort, the care, the history behind it all. Thanksgiving morning, I was up at 5. The turkey went into the oven by 6. By 10, the whole apartment smelled like rosemary, garlic, citrus. I lit candles, played soft jazz, checked the timing of every dish with quiet focus. At noon, my mother arrived first. She was carrying a store-bought pumpkin pie in a plastic container. "I thought I said I'd cover dessert," I said, managing a smile. "Well," she replied, scanning the table, "you always forget the little touches. This way I know we'll have something traditional." I ignored the jab. She frowned at my white plates. "You know blue would have added more warmth. These are very Clinical. I offered her a glass of wine. She took it, sat on the couch, turned on the parade, and immediately began commenting on how my living room felt more like a waiting room than a home. At 12:30, Jason and his wife Ashley arrived. Ashley handed me a bouquet of flowers. Jason handed me nothing but a distracted hug. He was already talking to Mom before I could even say hello. "You look so good," she cooed to him, cupping his face. "Florida suits you. Look at that tan." I poured Ashley a glass of wine. She seemed polite, curious, maybe even a little observant. "It's lovely here," she said, glancing around. "You must have worked hard on this place." I nodded, unsure how to respond to genuine appreciation. At 12:45, my father showed up with a six-pack of his usual domestic beer. I had spent extra on craft selections he liked last year, but apparently those had been too fancy. He walked in, glanced around, and said, "You really went all out, huh?" Then he muttered, "Bit much if you ask me." I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, listening as he sat down and said to Jason, "She's trying to show off again. Must be all that city money making her feel important." My hands shook. I stirred the gravy harder than necessary. I breathed through my nose. Jason came into the kitchen looking for beer. Dad brought the good stuff, he joked, reaching into my fridge. "There's IPA in there," I said. "That one you liked last time." "Yeah, but he says those are for people trying too hard." "Right," I said. Trying. I pulled the turkey out of the oven. It was perfect. Golden. Moist. Stuffed. Everything timed to the minute. I called everyone to the table. It looked like a magazine spread. Warm rolls. Roasted vegetables. 3 different kinds of potatoes. The ham glistening under candlelight. The turkey carved just right. My father frowned. "Where's the stuffing?" "Right in front of you," I said, pointing. "It's cornbread stuffing." I added apple and sausage. "Not like your mother's," he muttered. Then he reached for the ham. We held hands for grace. My father led it. "Lord, thank you for this food and for bringing our family together. We're grateful for Jason's safe travels, his continued success, and for Ashley joining us today." He ended the prayer. That was it. No mention of the food, the home, the effort, or me. Ashley looked at me across the table and gave a small, knowing smile. The kind that says, "I see you. I see what's missing." We began eating. My mother offered lukewarm praise. "The turkey's not bad, though I usually let it go longer." Ashley, bless her, countered. "It's perfect. Moist but fully done." "Did you brine it?" I nodded, grateful. "Overnight. With citrus and herbs. Fancy," my dad muttered. Then launched into football talk with Jason. For 20 minutes they discussed stats, wins, losses, beer brands. My mother asked Ashley about her job. I sat in silence. Finally, Ashley turned to me. "So, how's work?" Before I could answer, my mother cut in. "Oh, she's still doing that finance thing. Always glued to a screen. Nothing like Jason's job meeting all those interesting people." I cleared my throat. "Actually, I was promoted last month. I now manage a portfolio over $300 million in assets." Ashley's eyes widened. "That's incredible," my dad scoffed. "Numbers on a screen, not real work." "My work supports real families," I said quietly. "Their retirement, their futures. And it's also what's kept this family afloat." The table fell silent. My father put his fork down. "There it is," he said. "You always have to bring up the money." "You mean the money I've sent for 3 years?" I asked. "The money that's kept your lights on." My mother looked embarrassed. Jason stared at his plate. "I've never asked for anything." I continued. "Not praise, not repayment, just a little respect." My father's voice rose. "Don't talk to me about respect. You think cutting a few checks makes you better than us?" "No," I said. "But it's interesting that you call it a few checks when it's been nearly $90,000. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "If you're going to talk to us like this, you can leave." I stood too. Calm, steady. "Actually, this is my apartment. And you're the guests. So if anyone should leave, it's you." My mother gasped. Jason stood confused. Ashley stayed frozen. I walked to the door, opened it, held it wide. Dinner's over. So is the support. They didn't move right away. My father stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard, like I'd just challenged him to a duel. My mother blinked rapidly, looking from me to the door and back again, trying to decide whether this was a tantrum or something more permanent. Jason looked stunned, like he had walked into the wrong movie halfway through. Ashley was the only one who seemed entirely unsurprised. She stood up slowly, touched Jason's arm, and said quietly, "Come on." One by one, they walked out. My mother paused at the doorway, turned to me, and hissed just loud enough for only me to hear. "You're just jealous of your brother. You always have been. We took you in, gave you everything, and still you act like this." It landed like a slap. Not the jealousy part, I'd heard that before, but the last sentence. "We took you in, gave you everything." I watched her step into the hallway, my father right behind her, grumbling something under his breath. Jason mumbled an awkward apology and followed. Ashley looked at me with something close to regret. "You didn't deserve that," she whispered, then closed the door gently behind her. I stood in my apartment alone, surrounded by untouched food and cold candles, hearing the words on repeat. "We took you in, gave you everything." I didn't know what to do with that. I had never been told explicitly clearly that I wasn't their biological child. But in hindsight, it made sense. The constant emotional distance. The way they always described Jason as our son and me as our girl. The subtle differences. The tiny slights that piled up but were never spoken aloud. I had wondered for years why I felt like I was always auditioning for a role in a family that had already been cast. Now I knew. I wasn't cast. I was placed. Fit in afterward. Accepted but never absorbed. Not fully. And they had never told me. I walked to the table, sat down in the silence, and stared at the food. I had spent 3 days preparing. I hadn't eaten a bite. My hands were steady, my breathing slow, but inside something was shifting. Something old was breaking apart. Something that had held me hostage for years, the need to be accepted, to be seen, to be enough, was unraveling, and in its place was something colder, clearer. This wasn't about one bad dinner. This was about 30 years of being the backup plan, of being used when convenient and ignored the rest of the time, of being tolerated but never truly embraced. I stood up, went to my laptop, opened the banking apps, canceled every automatic payment. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries. All gone. Then I drafted an email to the family attorney outlining the end of all financial support effective immediately. I even included the exact amount I had contributed since starting. Just for the record. Just so no one could pretend it hadn't happened. Then I opened a new document. A list. Title: My life moving forward. No line items for guilt. No entries for obligation. Just clarity. Just space. Just mine. I closed the laptop, looked around the apartment. This space that had always felt like a refuge suddenly felt like a reclaimed battlefield. They had invaded it with their criticism, their coldness, their entitlement, and I had let them. No more. No more quiet compliance. No more background role. No more buying love with silence and money. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and for the first time in years, I felt still. Not numb, not angry, just still. Tomorrow there would be phone calls, texts, guilt, noise. But tonight there was peace. They had disowned me, and I had disowned them back. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying that single sentence. We took you in, gave you everything. It wasn't just a slip. It was a revelation, one that recontextualized decades of cold glances, unspoken favoritism, and conversations that always felt one step removed. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and pulled out the one thing I had never dared to look for: my birth certificate. I had never had a reason to question it. I'd never been told I was adopted, and nothing in my legal documents suggested anything was amiss. But I had questions now, real ones, and I wanted real answers. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office and requested a copy of my original birth record. It wasn't there. What they had on file was an amended certificate one issued during a private adoption when I was only a year old. The names listed were my current parents, but the dates didn't match. The signatures weren't theirs. My heart was beating so fast I could barely hold the paper still. Suddenly, everything made sense. Why I always felt like an outsider in my own home. Why my achievements were never quite enough. Why Jason fit so easily into their world while I had to build mine from scratch. It wasn't just emotional distance. It was blood, or the lack of it. I wasn't their daughter. I was their responsibility, a duty they took on and performed but never embraced. And they never told me. They just let me carry the weight of proving I belonged while they quietly knew I never truly did. But here's the thing, finding out didn't break me. It validated what I had felt all along. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. There was a reason, a buried truth. And now that it was in the light, I could finally stop chasing their approval. I didn't need it anymore. I never really had. Being adopted didn't make me less worthy, but their silence about it paired with their treatment of me made one thing unmistakably clear. They never saw me as their own, and now I didn't see them as mine either. The fallout came quickly. By noon the next day, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. My father's tone shifted from anger to guilt to rage in a matter of hours. "How dare you walk out on your family," followed by, "You'll regret this," and then, "Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Hope you're satisfied." My mother's messages were drenched in manipulation. "After everything we've done for you, I can't eat. I can't sleep. We gave you a home. You're throwing your life away over one silly argument." But it wasn't one silly argument. It was the last straw after a lifetime of silent slights and being second. Jason didn't call. He sent one message. Was that really necessary? I didn't answer. What could I say that I hadn't already said with action? Then came the gossip. Aunt Laura texted me, "Heard you blew up at your parents' on Thanksgiving. What's going on?" Uncle Rob left a voicemail asking if I needed to talk to someone, clearly implying therapy, as if I had lost my mind. The worst part came 2 days later. I was in the produce section of my neighborhood grocery store when I saw them. My parents, standing near the apples. My father's jaw tightened when he saw me. My mother walked straight over. "So this is where you've been hiding?" she said, loud enough for the nearby shoppers to hear. "You think you can just run away from your family like we're trash?" I told her this wasn't the place. I asked her to lower her voice. She didn't. She called me ungrateful. Told everyone within earshot that they took me in when no one else would, and I repaid them with betrayal. Someone pulled out a phone, filmed it. I turned and left my cart where it was, drove straight home, locked the door. By that evening, the video had surfaced on a local community page, entitled "Daughter Disrespects Her Parents in Public After They Raised Her." The comments were brutal. Strangers calling me spoiled, heartless, broken. I could have posted the receipts, shared the bank transfers, shown the adoption records, but I didn't. I stayed quiet, because none of them knew the truth. Not really. They only saw a loud woman crying and a quiet woman walking away. And they made their choice, just like my family always had. I turned off my phone, closed the blinds, and realized that for the first time their voices didn't shake me. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't scared. I was done. Let them spin their story. I had finally started writing my own. I booked my first therapy session 3 days after the grocery store incident. Not because I felt broken, but because I needed someone who wouldn't try to guilt me back into place. Someone who didn't share DNA with me. Someone who would listen without asking me to make peace just for the sake of it. Her name was Dr. Latham. She had kind eyes and didn't flinch when I told her everything. The money, the silence, the Thanksgiving blow-up, the adoption reveal, the public scene at the grocery store. She didn't interrupt. She just nodded occasionally, writing something down. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You've been auditioning for a role you were never cast in, and you've been playing it perfectly for 30 years. I felt something loosen in my chest. She asked me what I felt when I thought about my family now. I said numb, then angry, then guilty, then nothing. She smiled gently. That's grief. You're not just losing people. You're losing the fantasy of who you hoped they could be. We talked about survival roles, how children in dysfunctional families learn to be useful, invisible, quiet. How they become hyper-independent, not because they're strong, but because they were never allowed to need anything. She said you were taught that love must be earned, that silence is safer than asking for more, that your worth is measured in what you can give. And then she said something that stayed with me. But love that must be bought isn't love. It's debt collection. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Over the next few sessions, we worked through the layers, the moments I had dismissed for years, being left at school pickup because Jason had a soccer game, watching my parents beam at his school plays while skipping mine, the time they used the college fund they promised me to buy him a used car. They didn't see you, she said. Not because you weren't there, but because they never looked for you. I asked if I had to forgive them. She said no, that forgiveness is a choice, not a requirement, that boundaries are not punishment, they're protection. I asked her what healing looks like. She said, it looks like choosing yourself. Every day. Until it doesn't feel like rebellion anymore. Just normal. I left that session lighter, not healed, but less alone. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to be understood. I was just being. And it was enough. The letter arrived on a Thursday, folded in a pale blue envelope with my name written in a careful, familiar script. I almost didn't open it. I stared at it for an hour, turning it over in my hands, wondering if this was another attempt to manipulate to guilt, to pull me back into the place I had just escaped. But something told me it was different. I opened it slowly, sat at the kitchen table, and began to read. Dear Claire. It began. I don't know if you'll read this. Kevin says he gave it to you, but I wouldn't blame you if you tore it up instead. I probably would have in your place. I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks about what I said at Thanksgiving, about what I didn't say for the last 30 years. I want to try to explain something, not to excuse it, just to name it. When we brought you home, you were tiny, quiet. You didn't cry much. The caseworker said you were self-soothing. I thought that meant you were easy, that you didn't need as much, that Jason, being our firstborn, would require more attention, more energy, and I leaned into that. I told myself you were strong, independent, that you were fine, and because you never complained, I kept believing that. But you weren't fine, and I see that now. I see that every time I remember a birthday we barely acknowledged, every time I remember brushing off your report cards while celebrating Jason's C's like they were gold medals, every time you stood in a room and I looked past you. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I did. Repeatedly, consistently. And I never stopped to ask why you were so quiet, why you stopped sharing things, why you moved further and further away, not just physically, but emotionally. I think I knew deep down. But admitting it would have meant admitting I had failed you, and I wasn't ready to face that, not until now. Your father won't write you. He still believes you overreacted, that you made things about money. I know better. I know you made things about worth, and you were right to do so. You were right to walk away. I'm not writing to ask you to come back. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry it took losing you to finally understand what I had. Whatever you choose next, I respect it. I just hope someday if it ever feels right, you'll let me try again. Love, Mom. I finished reading and sat very still. There were no tears, no dramatic reaction, just a quiet, unexpected ache. Not hope, not reconciliation, just a recognition that something real had been said at last. I didn't respond that day, or the next. When I did, it was a single sentence. Thank you for your letter. I'm not ready to talk, but I appreciate your honesty. That was all I could give, and for once, it felt like enough. Spring arrived quietly. Buds appeared on the trees outside my apartment, the light softened, and the air smelled like new beginnings. My sessions with Dr. Latham continued, and with each week I felt a little steadier. Not happier exactly, but grounded. I saw Kevin one afternoon unexpectedly at a local cafe. He approached cautiously, holding his coffee like a peace offering. She told me she wrote you, he said. I nodded. I'm glad she did, he added. I think it helped her see things more clearly. Maybe, I said. He looked tired, a little older than the last time I'd seen him. I wanted to say he continued, "You were right. About all of it. I just didn't want to see it." "You didn't have to," I replied. "You were never the one being asked to disappear." He looked down, then up again. "I'm trying to do better. I didn't say anything, but I didn't walk away either. A week later, I hosted a dinner. Not for family, but for friends. People who showed up without asking for proof of loyalty. People who saw me as I was, not as they expected me to be. We ate on mismatched plates, laughed about little things, drank cheap wine that tasted perfect because no one was judging it. At one point, someone raised a glass. "To chosen families," they said. I smiled. That night, as I cleared the table, I realized something simple and profound. The family I had fought so hard to be part of was never truly mine. But the peace I felt now, the warmth in that room, the way I could breathe without bracing for impact, that was real. That was mine, and I had chosen it.